This is my idea about a vision for Congregation of the Arts. I present it to you as a suggestion of a direction to head in. And it starts with a very bold idea, which is, can we transform the world? The objective, as I see it, is to revolutionize how people think of art, religion, spirituality, and how they relate. And when I say how they relate, I mean how these things relate to each other and how people relate to each other. Using the latest learning and cutting-edge ideas, how we can transform religion, spirituality, and art, how it's experienced, and also how children are raised in this society. We talk a little bit about right and left brain. On the left brain, as you know, analytical thought, logic, language, science, and math. On the right brain, it's more holistic thought, intuition, creativity, art, and I would say the original spiritual or religious experience before it is interpreted, labeled, judged by the brain, by the mind, and then conditions begin to come up, or how can I recreate that experience? So again, the one side we got the math, the logic, and the grammar. On the other side we have the more holistic, intuition, magical, and perceptive. That's the artistic side. So the left brain, what it does is it codifies and it labels and it puts rules and it puts judgments upon religion, spirituality, and art. And so essentially takes that initial experience and begins to layer things on top of it. Now the right brain, on the other hand, is just about the pure experience and flow. This is where these original inspirations and inspiration to breathe in comes from. So the left brain dominance means that the norm that we have for raising children is conditional love. In other words, we love them based on their beliefs or based on their behavior or their shared beliefs and attitudes. In other words, we give them approval only if they do what we want. This is taken as the obvious. To even question this may seem radical to people. But what happens as a result of this is that the child engages in displays of love in order to win approval. So how does this relate to what we're talking about? Well, basically we've all been trained, if we've grown up in Western civilization, we've been trained to be inauthentic. So then this inauthenticity is fueled by the need for approval, and it's crept into art, it's crept into religion, it's crept into spirituality. So what's the antidote? Well, what if we begin to demonstrate art created and presented from the right brain? So there's no judgment, there's no need for approval, and there's no agenda. So then art is presented with vigilance over our left brain's habit of labeling, judging, and imposing conditional love, and becomes one of pure self-expression, simply to experience and share unconditional love. It's not to prove anything or convince anyone or inspire any opinion or behavior. I would like to base what we're doing, if people agree to this, on this book I'm reading called Raising Our Children, Raising Ourselves. Even if you're not interested in child raising or have a child, or planning on having a child ever, it does provide an interesting model about how we have all been trained and how conditional approval has colored how we experience things. So that's where I'm saying is we can begin to examine where this all began. So raising children outside of the power dynamics, outside of this common practice of only showing approval or affection if they do as we wish. So now one might say, well then wouldn't that result in chaos? Or is the human tendency to turn any idea into a tool of control something we need to constantly guard against? Look, we can use validation to gain control. We can manipulate by using it. We can even be disrespectful by telling a child how we think they should be feeling. Now, when a child, it can trigger rage. In an audience, if you're talking about an artistic experience, it's judgment. But either way, it is a rejection. So the tools of control. Now, art does this, but can we resist the temptation? And speaking of Lutheran, is this what Martin Luther was saying about what the church is doing 500 years ago? Does the left brain hijack the pure experience, apply labels and rules to make love conditional? And if so, can we create art and investigate child raising to reverse this tendency? I mean, in one sense, theater doesn't judge. This new model of parenting and theater doesn't judge anything wrong when there's upset or anger. On stage, they're supposed to be upset and anger. The audience doesn't say, oh, it's a shame that they're angry. But in parenting, usually we say, oh, it's a problem that this child is angry. Well, what if it's not a problem? What if we just have compassion? So then the audience, just as the parent, simply feels compassion. And this allows what I call direct attention. And yet we know judgment pervades our lives. In a congregation, in a cast for a play or a film, in an office, in a family, we're conditioned to try to impress the leader, whether that's the spiritual or religious leader, the director of the play or the film, or the boss in the office, or the father or the mother, because love is seen as conditional. So this ends up creating an ego competition. And some people just don't want to compete in that, right? So then they leave the spiritual or religious community, they quit the job, or they remain and forever judge themselves poorly because that approval can't be won. And this is the thing, like with a parent or a boss or a spiritual religious leader, you may have glimpses where, hey, they say, hey, you did this right, or I see you're making progress, and then suddenly it becomes an ego trap, and then you're trying to win that approval again. Now, in the realm of sort of selflessness, you can see how this then becomes trying to add something to yourself, that there's somehow we need the approval of that person, and suddenly then anything authentic, anything that's truly about grace and love is lost in this ego competition for approval. So what is the vision? Employing the latest artistic and behavioral ideas, and again we're talking about right brain, left brain, and the unconditional love parenting approach. We use these latest artistic and behavioral ideas to create art, and then we document, research, and share that art with other congregations, universities, and arts groups. And we're talking about research-based actions, and this is something that Josh and I have done for years, originally in a Buddhist context, in terms of let's do some research here, let's do some internal inquiry. So basically what we're talking about is exploring ideas each month with the participants bringing in ingredients, sort of text, visual, music, maybe certain performers, bringing it in and seeing what synergies can be created. But the idea really is that there's no judgment, there's no direct focus on a performance, and it involves the community, whatever the community is, whatever the congregation is. But then this thing I want to add to this is talking to parents and teachers in the preschool and in New York City about these parenting ideas. Would they work? There's some very forward-thinking ideas, but have they been tested? Let's talk to people who actually have used them. But if the ideas do work, it would change society completely. The connection to how we relate in our communities, religious communities, spiritual communities, families, office, is clear. Can our art be informed by what we learn, feel, and come to believe while not aiming to convince anyone of anything? It's a very subtle line that we're talking about, and most artists, and I would say most religious and spiritual communicators, often don't want to walk or don't even think to walk. So where does morality fit in all this? Well, this is a quote from the book. Many worry that this unconditional love approach will strip them of the right to defend moral thoughts. But you get to express your values more when you do so with personal words. When you're pointing fingers and waving rights and wrongs in the face of the accused, what happens? We lose him. He can't hear us. So it's a willingness to be vulnerable with our personal experience and our expectations. I talk about how it makes me feel when you don't take some action that I want you to take, or when you don't believe something, or you do believe something, in contrary to my belief structure, right? So then a child or a spouse or a friend or a member of a congregation doesn't feel threatened or alienated, right? They just feel connected and moved. So we're talking about a new model for art and congregation. Arts groups and congregations are struggling today, but by uniting and cross-pollinating, each could revitalize the other. By introducing brain science and behavioralism as it relates to unconditional love, religious, spiritual, and artistic groups shift the conversation to a new level. Congregation of the Arts, COTA, would document the theater group and the interviews with parents and child development experts about this idea of unconditional love and authentic right brain action. So what would we actually do? Well, we articulate on video, in performance, in workshops, in monthly experiments, and on the web our vision of how to revolutionize how people think about art, religion, spirituality, and child raising. Now, Pratt University is right across the street, and they've got a graduate program in media studies, so we could heavily involve the schools, especially because we're taking on this research component, and we're talking about sharing information without an agenda, which is a very subtle thing, which media studies hasn't really explored. Typically, media is about convincing people, driving actions or changing behavior or changing opinions. But what we're trying to do here is model and explore. So the goal will be to create online videos, a website, a social media effort, and a promotional film to share our results and our experiences with others. Others as religious, spiritual congregations, universities, and arts groups. So that's sort of the outline, and I did that in 10 minutes. Hopefully this makes some sense, and I look forward to feedback.